John O'Keefe was a good guy. And those are the words, good guy, are the ones he would want used. He didn't need accolades or adulation. He was happy to be known as a good son, a good brother, a good cop, a good uncle, a good parent. Yet though he wouldn't have wanted anyone to say it, he was much more than just a good guy. But when those times came, when he needed to be willing to make sacrifices in order to step up for friends or family, he never failed. John had 2 siblings and was very close to both of them. His brother Paul recently learned that John had been quietly taking a fellow officer to his cancer treatments. No one else knew this because John didn't care about recognition or praise. But John wasn't just a good guy, he was a regular guy. Like many boys, he grew up wanting to be a cop, and not just any cop, but a Boston police officer. John's grandfather had been a Boston cop. However, it was a long road to get there. After graduating from Northeastern with a degree in criminal justice, he joined the Auxiliary Police in Falmouth on Cape Cod, where he worked the summer. He then got on to the Duxbury Police Force as a permanent intermittent. He stuck this out for years until at last, learning he'd been accepted into the Boston Police Academy. So at the age of 29 and after much persistence, the dream of becoming a Boston cop finally came true. As John reached his 30s, he had the life he wanted. Single, he liked to go out and have a good time. He was living his dream. But then his sister came down with the horrific diagnosis of brain cancer. Happily married and with 2 small children, she now faced a terrible battle. But John, out of work at the time on injury leave, spent every day at the hospital with her. After she passed away, John was actually considering moving in with his brother-in-law to help with the kids. Just imagine that, a young single man giving up his lifestyle to move in with his brother-in-law. And then tragedy struck again. John was away with friends on vacation in New Orleans when word came that his brother-in-law had now had a sudden heart attack and passed away. Well, John jumped on the next flight home. As the family struggled with what to do with 2 young kids who had now been orphaned, John didn't hesitate. "I got this," he said, and he moved in with the kids. Overnight, he went from living the bachelor life to having to become an instant father to a 3 and a 6-year-old. As his brother Paul said at John's eulogy, while most fathers have 9 months to prepare, John had no time. He'd been a great uncle, a regular part of the kids' lives, but now he suddenly had to bear the weight of making decisions and raising a family. They bought a house in Canton, and John had 8 wonderful years raising his nephew and niece, quickly becoming connected to the community and involved in their schools and kids' sports. On the last day of his life, John would take his nephew, then 10, to D&E Pizza in downtown Canton. The owner, Chris Albert, had been John's neighbor for 8 years and had befriended him. Chris invited John and Karen, his girlfriend of the last 2 years, to meet him and his wife and several others that night at the Waterfall Pub. Later, when John was out with Karen, Chris would text him to say they were at the pub and so they could head over to join them. There, John did what he always enjoyed, having drinks with friends. When they invited him to an after-hours party together at the home of Chris's brother Brian, also a Boston police officer, it was natural that John would accept the invitation. He didn't really know Brian, a legendary cop who had long headed the fugitive task force, but here was a chance to build a more personal connection, doing it in the way that John enjoyed, over a drink. It was outside Brian's house that tragedy would again strike the O'Keefe family. But despite all the noise surrounding what happened, one thing John's friends and family would like the world not to forget is this: John was a good guy.